Welcome, everybody. This is Rooted with your host, Melissa Kroonenberg, co-founder and sole owner of New Roots Therapy. We are so thrilled to have you with us once again. Today, I have an amazing guest, Georgia Campbell. Georgia has been a friend and associate to the New Roots Therapy community for the last 3 years, and we are so pumped to have her on our show today. Welcome, Georgia.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm excited.
You're so thrilled to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Of course.
This month we're focusing on the power of therapy, and you have been brave enough, courageous enough even, to come on the show and talk to us about your therapy experience, your experience around being a therapist, what you've learned over the course of your journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just to start off, tell me a little bit about, what inspired your journey to even become a therapist.
Okay. Yeah. So in hindsight, looking back now, being the therapist that I am, if I were to reflect back on younger Georgia, figuring out this career and trying to understand what she's going to do, I now realize that there were a lot of elements in my life as a young girl that has made me kind of pursue this career. And just being, for example, always there for friends, or people coming up to me and being like, I feel so connected or safe to you.
Right.
And in hindsight, looking back, it's probably because that was my role growing up. That was what I needed to do. And I think subconsciously it just led me to therapy, because that's what I do every day for my clients. So, yeah.
Excellent. Is there anything in learning to become a therapist that you have come to realize about your experience growing up that maybe you didn't understand beforehand?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things, and I imagine maybe other therapists can relate, or clients as they're doing the work too, where you realize these personality or characteristics about yourself is just like, oh, this is me, or this is who Georgia is, and then you look back and you're like, oh, that was me coping, or that was a defense mechanism. And a part of my coping was to stay silent and just to listen and be a really good listener. And looking back, I'm like, okay, then I found a career that all I do is listen and be there and am empathetic to my clients. And so I think that's a huge part of what shaped, and looking back in hindsight, probably what led me to being a therapist. So
amazing. Yeah. And so, you've spoken to me about your journey into getting into therapy yourself, as a client, which, and we spoke on a previous podcast around this idea that therapists don't need their own therapists, and the myth of that, and that, we are all human and not inoculated from the human experience just because we're therapists. Yeah. And that even part of being a good therapist is really having a good sense of yourself and having great emotional awareness. And so can you tell me a little bit about what it was that led you to feel like you wanted to reach out to therapy?
Absolutely. I actually have a funny story when you were mentioning that. When I started therapy, it was in 2020 around COVID time. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm just starting school to be a therapist, and now I'm going to therapy. What does that say about me as a potential therapist? And I think for me, I held that stigma around it too, of is this okay? Does this reflect how I'm going to be as a therapist if I'm also going to therapy too?
Makes so much sense.
Yeah. So when you're saying that, I actually thought of a really funny story, because I was in therapy. I had just met my therapist, and I had mentioned that to her. And she's like, well, do doctors need help when they're sick? And I was like, yeah. She's like, okay, so then therapists will need therapy too when they're going through something.
I love that.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, that's actually a really good analogy, and it stuck with me ever since. And then being a therapist myself, I'm like, not only is it completely normal and makes you a better therapist to go to therapy and see that side as a client, but it's helped me so much as a therapist because I can better relate to my clients. I'm like, I know what it's like to sit in that chair or sit on that couch or be on the other side, being so vulnerable. And it's helped guide my therapy. It's helped guide myself as a therapist, just making the clients feel more safe and more comfortable. So
I love that, Georgia. I
Mhm.
feel like you captured that so beautifully,
Yeah.
and I can relate on so many
Yeah.
levels. Are there any particular insights that that you're comfortable sharing that you feel like you got from the therapy process, like even after your education as a therapist, that you
Mhm.
feel like have been important or transformative, even in how either in your life or how you navigate being a therapist?
Yeah. Well, touching on how to navigate being a therapist in my everyday life, coming fresh out of school and then doing therapy, I was like, how do I turn this off? Like, I was like, how am I going into the world and not helping people all the time? Similarly to my coping mechanism, okay, now I see that this is what got me here, but where's my off switch?
Right.
So it was hard. I had my fiance at the time saying things like, I feel like you're therapizing me. Can we turn it
Right.
off? Or friends that would come to me and be like, I need you as a therapist. And I'm like, I just want to be a friend. So it was very challenging to navigate when to take that hat off and when to leave it on. And once I kind of had a good sense of who I am outside of a therapist and knowing that parts of it were in the past coping and finding new ways to cope, shout out therapy, then I kind of had a chance to navigate that a bit better.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So I know from my own experience as a therapist, but also just from talking to my friends, that choosing a therapist can be a very challenging task, because you want to have the right fit, and there's so many different models of therapy out there, and each therapist brings their own unique style and approach. And so, like, how did you go about choosing your therapist?
Yeah, it is a tough situation because you can be in the field and you can be a therapist yourself, but it's like, where am I going to find my therapist?
Right.
And I have friends sometimes that will say, like, where do I even go for that? Like, is there like some website or something? So at the time, I used Psychology Today. And I think it was really what the therapist was saying that drew me in. And I just really connected with my therapist at the time.
Can you say more about what it was that you were seeing
Mm-hmm.
as you were looking through therapists that kind of caught your eye?
Yeah, it was naming what I was going through, naming my experiences, and then ending with, this is why we're in therapy, and it's okay to want to explore that and have the courage to explore that. And I think, yeah, primarily it was just she's naming all my experiences. This is what I've been through. This is, someone saying my experiences and saying they understand it. And now you're telling me I get a space to process that and work through it. I was like, that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Relatability in the experience as well.
right, relatability. So like reading their profile and feeling like you had a sense of connection to what they were saying, and that something about the words they used or how they conveyed themselves really spoke to you and your experience, and sort of that had you take the first step. And did you, like, once you did have your therapist, was it the perfect match, or did you have to find did you have to try on a few, so to speak, in order to feel comfortable, or how did that go?
Yeah. I thought that was going to be the process. I had different emails lined up and meet and greets that I was ready for. And I think just in the moment, I didn't have to. It was that meet and greet that I just like connected initially, but I know that's not always the case. There are times where you have a meet and greet and you're like, that just doesn't feel safe or comfortable or doesn't align with me. And that just didn't happen to be my case, but I know that's very common for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well. Not just from the perspective of a client, but also therapist.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it has to feel like a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to feel like you have a solid connection.
Exactly. And it's a relationship at the end of the day too. So if you, outside of the therapy world, connect with someone and you can't really explain it, and you just end up having a friendship with this person or a relationship, it kind of carries over into therapy as well too. Like sometimes you can't just name what it is about the therapist that just you connect so deeply, and sometimes it goes without saying, and sometimes you just know what it is. And I think looking back at that time, there was something there I couldn't name, and now I know it was safety and comfortability.
So I know that finding the right therapist can be a bit of a challenge. I've heard this from friends and clients alike. I'm curious about how you went about finding the right fit for you.
Yeah, I know it can be quite a process. Sometimes you get one right off the bat through your meet and greet, which happened to be my experience, but that's not always the case. And sometimes you're doing meet and greet after meet and greet, or you're in a couple sessions with a therapist and you're thinking, yeah, this isn't working for me. And you can even get defeated as well too, because you're really looking for that space. You finally get it, and then you're like, wait, maybe this isn't working for me. So
Yeah, it's hard because it takes so much courage, I think, for a lot of folks to just even make the call and schedule the appointment. And then when they get there and it's not really what they were expecting, it can be so defeating. And I've, in speaking with clients over the years, heard many stories where, they tried either one therapist beforehand or even several therapists beforehand, and they just really weren't a good fit. And I mean, what would you say to someone who's like struggling to find the right fit, or someone who goes and tries and doesn't feel like it's the right fit?
yeah, I'm just like thinking about just how hard it would be to be in that space and trying to navigate through it. So I think I would probably connect it back to a relationship, because it is one at the end of the day. And similarly to finding a right person or finding that close friend, if the relationship doesn't work out or the friendship has to end for whatever reason, we keep going. We know instinctively, like, my person's out there. And I think if we hold that belief about our therapist too, like, my therapist is out there, I know I'm going to connect with someone, it might help kind of in those moments of disappointment or confusion, just to know that there is someone out there for you.
Yeah, I love that. I think even in my own therapy experience, I mean, I've had several different therapists over the years, and I wouldn't say that any one of them like weren't a great fit. I think they were maybe a good fit for something specific. I took something away from each time that I engaged, but I do know that, everyone practices differently. There are many different styles and approaches, and it's not always going to be a great fit at the beginning. And I always tell my clients, as I think you do, that, if this isn't feeling good for whatever reason, like, please let me know. My main goal is to make sure that you feel supported and you feel helped, and do whatever I can to get them a better fit.
Yeah. Yeah, I just said that this morning in session. I was like, you want to feel right. You want to find that person that you can come in and just feel yourself, right? And don't hold off until finding that person, or don't feel like you have to settle for a therapist that you're not immediately getting that connection with. So I agree. 100%. Yeah.
So on that note, to what we were speaking about before around therapy and finding the right fit and how important that is, and which is undoubtedly true. I also know that therapy, when you're first engaging with it, can feel just so uncomfortable. And if you're not used to talking to someone about how you feel, or you're just new to the process, it can also feel uncomfortable. So I guess my question is, how do you differentiate between or help clients differentiate between what is discomfort around the process and what is discomfort or just like not a good fit between therapist and client?
Yeah. I would say helping them, be safe in the room and like build that safety and comfortability. So, for example, I'll do that with asking them about themselves in the meet and greet, right? And really getting to know them, really seeing them. And I think as a client, how you can differentiate is if, it feels safe and comfortable in the room and it still doesn't feel like you're connecting. It still doesn't seem like this person isn't getting me, or this person really doesn't see me, because as our job as therapists, that's what we're here for, to see you, understand you. So if you feel like your therapist isn't understanding that or really seeing you, maybe that's a really good sign that, this relationship might not work, or maybe to look elsewhere.
Right. So it's like if I'm in the room and it's nothing in particular that they're doing, or maybe it is something specific that they're doing, but even sometimes I can feel safe in a room and yet the person I'm talking with, they're just like, isn't that chemistry? Kind of like what you were talking about before when you're trying to find your person, right?
Yeah.
Like in life, you date and there's nothing really specifically wrong with them,
Yeah.
but like the chemistry just doesn't feel like it's there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be true too of like finding your therapist. And I think too, like, I think you were kind of speaking to this, getting to know your client, asking questions. What are you looking for?
Mm-hmm.
Like as a therapist, this is something I'm always kind of like asking them, what's been your therapy experience before? Is there anything that you're really nervous about or fearful about related to the process, and hearing what it is they have to say so that it's a collaborative conversation, right? And then as a client myself, I think I'm sort of like, speaking to them about like what their process is, like how do they typically engage in therapy, like what can I expect as the client, is there a specific model that they draw from, which might not make sense to everyone because not everyone knows all of the therapy models, but still you want to get a sense of how they work, right?
Yeah.
And then if after that you feel like, it's still not a great fit, then you can make your choice from there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So with the therapy field in general, I feel like things have really transformed over the last bunch of years. And I remember as a child, like therapy just felt so much more stigmatized than it does these days. And, even for myself to sort of access therapy, or my friends, I often get the feedback that, people, although maybe trepidatious or whatever, are, really moving in the direction of wanting to explore therapy. Do you feel like even in your experience, do you feel like therapy has shifted over the years, and how people see therapy?
Absolutely. It was almost like taboo, like no one talk about therapy, no one bring it up. And now it's like, oh, you also go to therapy? Oh, how is that for you? Or, if you are talking to someone, or, you're single and you're dating and they're like, oh, he doesn't go to therapy. So it almost has like completely shifted on the other side, where it's so much a conversation, and everyone else is kind of getting comfortable talking about it, that it's taboo maybe almost to not go, right? So
I
it's
agree 100%. Like even in my own dating experience, when someone that I'm like seeing or dating says, I go to therapy, I see that as a huge green flag, as opposed to like the red flag that I feel like it would have been seen as many years ago. Just because like it tells me like you're interested in growth, you're curious maybe, and self-aware, which I just feel like are so fundamentally important to healthy relationships. And so I guess I wonder, like, having sort of said that and like identifying that, where do you see the future of therapy going? Like, what do you think is sort of on the horizon? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't know if I have like a great deal of a sense of where it's heading, but I can see it becoming more and more popular. Similarly to what our point is, those that aren't working on themselves or aren't trying to grow in some way, it might even become more taboo or more of like a red flag, so to speak. So I can just imagine it being more people going, more people connecting about going to therapy, and being in an everyday conversation rather than like, no one talk about therapy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Like, I think even with like the new research coming out on trauma and its impact on individuals and families
Yeah.
and even couple relationships,
Mm-hmm.
that there is a real sort of acknowledgement for how mental health can really impact people at the individual, couple, and familial level.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more widely recognized now more than ever at how the mind and body are connected. So like, we
Yes.
cannot separate physical health from mental health. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
just not a thing we can do anymore. And more research and more experts are speaking to this, that we can't sort of isolate one from the other.
Exactly.
They work in tandem. And so, if exercise is as important to physical health, therapy or things that care for the mind are important for mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another cool thing that's developed over the years, I think, that's really transformed the face of therapy is that there is online therapy, which is definitely new to the game of therapy and has definitely escalated since COVID. And I would say has really increased the accessibility of therapy to folks. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Well, think about COVID times. This is where I started at New Roots, and it was a place where I was only doing it virtual for so long.
Right.
And we saw an influx of clients coming in virtually. And I remember them saying, like, this is so nice because at a time where we can't leave and we can't do anything around like leaving our home and the safety around that, we could still get access to mental health resources and get the help we needed right from our home. So that was like a huge shift that we saw.
Exactly. And I think that people had a hard time, like, especially prior to COVID, imagining that it could be as helpful as seeing someone in person. Like, you would be losing something.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't totally disagree with that. But at the same time, the resounding feedback that we got in COVID was like, this is not nearly as bad or difficult as I thought it would be. In fact, there were so many benefits that people hadn't even anticipated in terms of just like not needing to find childcare. If they could figure that out a lot easier, not needing to commute, being in a safe, comfortable space in their own home. Like, there were so many benefits to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like I can do therapy on my couch with my popcorn and my dog right beside me. Perfect. That sounds great.
Thanks for tuning into Rooted, everybody. I would love to thank our beautiful guest, Georgia Campbell, for joining us today. As usual, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out to us. If you want to reach out to Georgia, you can at her website, therapywithme.ca. See you at the next episode.